Hello friends, this second video I'm going to talk about NATO in general because while we are focused on Ukraine and its membership to NATO, there is an outline of an attempt or a plan to really unravel NATO altogether. I'm going to sort out the possibilities here and let you take that from here. Right now, although Ukraine is the target, seems to be the target, I wager that entire NATO, as an establishment for the defense of Europe and so on, common defense of Europe, is actually intended, the intention is to really unravel it, destroy it, and remove it from existence, basically. Although it is in a sense, a meaningless, almost a meaningless establishment, because wherever those tripod of Israel function, NATO really doesn't intervene, and in fact it does help, such as what happened in the Middle East. What's happening in the Middle East, what used to be called as the Arab Spring, if you remember Rabbi Obama heralding what's called the Arab Spring, it's really, you don't understand how he talks, and he is a brother of Putin, he's a brother of Trump, he's a brother of Bush, he's brother of Johnson and Macron, and what he means by that is the Israeli Spring. And the Israeli Spring, there is something similar going on now in Europe. I'm going to predict that it's going to be called European Spring. Probably will be addressed in a different term, like described by different terms and so on. When eventually it is really a new stage that is going to unravel NATO and the establishment, the current establishment, even though the current establishment is defanged, if you will, it's not powerful enough, but it's still coherent, unifying the landscape in Europe in coherent fashion. So that's what I am believing in now. So if you want to compare what's going on in Ukraine, you could clearly see that it is something similar to the German blitzkrieg into the Soviet Union, and then there was a first battle that was lost, right? And I think Stalingrad, not Stalingrad, or Kursk, or somewhere where Hitler and his brother Stalin made sure and made certain in cooperating under table, made sure that Germany begins to fall back, and eventually the fallback didn't really stop on the borders or an agreement or peace treaty, or wasn't in the cards that Germany was to be completely gutted and defanged and made basically neutralized, in a word, paralyzed and neutralized, and that happened. However, Germanics have recovered somewhat, on individual and probably family level, and eventually Germany. Let's put it this way: I have a feeling a second stage is being prepared for Europe as European countries are concerned. And if you notice, I believe that Putin is either dead and there's a surrogate due to his intestinal cancer and so on, which was divulged and divulged and talked about in the media about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. But there is a chance of him being sick. But there is that other chance as well, that when Macron and Scholz went there and then they tried to put the Europeans and the world into a psychological spin zone, that this man now is like too powerful, like they have to capitulate to him. Similar to Europeans having to deal with Stalin, and they were so happy about the United States being part of their lives and so on, because they were hoping that that the occupation of the Soviets in Europe will not spill over and move all the way to Holland and the rest of West Germany and Scandinavia and so on. But believe me, you should also thank those Muslims who defeated the Soviet Union, and they withdrew, basic and simple. Fact of the matter is, right now, I believe NATO has bad future. It's receding. It's going to start receding. And of course, with cooperation and assistance of the local establishments. And a new future, similar to that of the Middle East, is going to happen in Europe. They called it Arab Spring. Oh, well, we know it's we call it Israeli Spring, right? And there's, in my opinion, there's some kind of something called European reform. That means Western Europe, namely Scandinavia and Germanic places like Holland, like Germany, like here and there. Now you may say, well, you know, that's like overactive imagination, good for a book of fiction. Oh, no. I'm going to bring you an evidence. I have quite few, but one evidence is when, if you recall, and that was a slip of the tongue. In the West, they call it, we call it back home like an old, this is an old Arab notion or metaphor. Call it, you know, zallat lisan, or slip of a tongue. Later on in the West, they call it Freudian slip. If you recall, when Donald Rumsfeld wanted to go into Iraq, right? Yeah, I think that's when he wanted to go into Iraq. The little guy died anyway, not too long ago. And now he's facing his fate alone. Which he was loyal to, is no longer next to him. But that's a different subject. And some European countries, such as France, such as Germany, I think, they objected, except Tony Blair, of course. Tony Blair was vehement on killing Saddam and killing Gaddafi, and later on, I think Bush as well. You know, Bush and Blair and Putin and so on. And they were vehement on killing those guys, and Saleh of Yemen and so on. Why? Because they come from a Sunni background. Even though they were New World Order, you know, you can see them, you know, like moving there with their gestures and words and how they conducted themselves as rulers, you know, modernization and blah, blah, you know, westernization and so on. And he said, and I quote, the US establishment was so irritated by the position of Europe, and namely Jacques Chirac of France, who was like, had far deep insight into what was going to happen in Iraq. So did Clinton, by the way. This guy Clinton, you know, the cowboy, when he said, and I recall that after Bush W went into Iraq, he says, it'll probably be fixed within 13 years, if it's going to get fixed, right? But at what cost, right? You know, United States lost a lot of prestige and reputation in Iraq, aside from human loss of soldiers and so on and so forth. And that war, every war in the Middle East, I don't want to expand to Vietnam or elsewhere, you know, Asia and so on, or South America. Every war that happened in the Middle East in the last century, and before that, is Israel's war, period. But what did Donald Rumsfeld, he was the defense minister, remember. What did he say about those European countries who opposed the invasion of Iraq and the war in the Middle East? And they were vehement about it. Chirac was, and I think Germans were. And he said, and I quote, that's old Europe. There's my evidence. That is a Freudian slip, which means that in the mind of this establishment, that is Israeli establishment in Washington, that Europe is old. And then you can complete the sentence, if you will, or connect the dots, meaning that old Europe must become new again. How? Well, look in the Middle East. Really, it's the same methodology. These are theories, of course, but they have very strong foundation. NATO right now is the purpose and target of the takeover by Putin's from Moscow, lizard eyes of Moscow. And my friends, I kid you not, you can take what I just said and expand it into an entire book of tactics and strategies and social upheavals and stuff. Europe has never been in peace, neither was the Middle East starting in the 1700s, whether it's the French Revolution or what happened in England and in Russia and communism and so on and so forth. The very recent history is troubled, that of the Muslim countries and that of European Christian countries. It's very troubling and it's very troubled. Continues to be so, and there is no exception now. People after the failure of communism, people in Europe and in the United States and here and there, oh, they kicked back and relaxed. I still remember I was in an office in the Immigration and Naturalization Service of the United States. One of my children was born outside of the country, and I was like basically naturalizing here. And I was in the office, and then in front of me, I can notice a gentleman and his wife. And they did look from the area of the stands. The stands are those Central Asian Republic. And he was talking to another gentleman who looked like also Eastern European. And they were there for immigration documents and applications and so on. And they were sitting in front of me. And the guy, it turns out that the man from the stands is really from Azerbaijan, right? He and his wife. And then he looked back at me because, you know, sometimes if you're from the same area and you notice like there's resemblance, right? You know, you can't help but notice. But then he was talking to the man from Eastern Europe while we were waiting our turns, you know, on the pews and so on. And he says, oh, we had our own perestroika. And I was like, these guys don't understand that what happened to them is not perestroika. And that's, that I would say is in the early 2000s. You know, like these guys don't understand what happened. Basically, what happened is that the Soviet Union was destroyed in Afghanistan, and it allowed, like, as if this dungeon guard was killed by one of the prisoners, right? And then everybody rushed out and jammed the doors, and you know, and that prisoner basically refused to succumb to the torture of the communism and so on, and kept fighting the guard and until he really overpowered the guards and then allowed everybody else to leave, right? Or let's say that gang, which really happened in Afghanistan. But, you know, we weren't talking. What I'm trying to say is this. If the Soviet Union did not falter in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union would have been in Europe where it is now, and life would have continued as troubled, as morbid, as tasteless, as it was a jail. You know, we know that, you know that, you know, and I could see people who in East Germany trying to make it to West Germany, and they're just dying and getting killed on the way just because they want to jump from one world to another. You know, that's how bad life was under those communists. My friends, the plan for Western Europe is revived again. NATO is now on the run. If NATO doesn't help Ukraine come into NATO, that will be the first battle lost on NATO's ground, and then the Putins will push in, and they have a lot of help within those European countries, what we call the fifth column, or what we call, and they're in the establishment. You know, they can make things happen. They can force things to happen. So NATO, NATO countries, if you really are concerned about your future, and I see perils in your future, consider that a prophecy. Then it's now time to act and make sure Ukraine comes into NATO and is a member of NATO. Otherwise, this will be your first lost battle, and then that wave of hordes of, you know, of Russians, of communism is gonna move slowly and surely into your countries, and they're gonna give it some name like Arab Spring or whatnot, you know. When it's really not, it's really Israel Spring. That's what Rabbi Obama was heralding, actually, and it was prepared for by Bush entering Iraq and Before that, it was prepared for Iran, to enter Iraq and the Gulf countries and so on. But things changed, of course. These guys are not gods, like by no means. I was watching a movie. I think it's called Taken by Liam Neeson, when his friend goes into East Germany and talks with a former Stasi member. I forgot his name. He's a German actor. And he says, and I quote, and I knew that, everybody knew that. But when somebody puts it right there, in words, you kind of smile. He says, oh, they're maybe good, but they're not God, right? So they're tripping and falling and getting up at best. And they've been doing that for a long time. And this time, however, it seems like they have covered a lot of grounds and plugged so many holes and so on. It'll end up in failure, as did before, but not before it caused a lot of harm and pain. NATO, wake up. NATO countries, wake up, because the plan for Europe and the loss and destruction of NATO and the dissolution of NATO and the unraveling of NATO will begin by Ukraine not being able to become a member or part of NATO. Have a nice day, my friends. I wish you luck. And if I can help, I will help by whatever means I can to avert this takeover of European Spring, if you will, what was called Arab Spring before, and look what it did in the Middle East. And the Middle East is not getting better, by the way. Oh, no. It's getting worse, and it'll get worse, and it'll get worse, and it'll get worse. And it will never get better. European countries, especially Germanics and Scandinavians, wake up now. Now is the time to start the fight and defense of yourself. It doesn't matter. Even if you have ideology that tells you that there's a new world and so on and so forth, you do not know. You will be, if you help against your own country, you will be part of that misery and that destruction that's going to visit your country. Maybe at your old age, you will regret it, but it'll be too late. Have a nice day, my friends, and I wish you luck.